On November 22, 1995, Damien was born into this world like any other child. He had 10 fingers, 10 toes, and despite slight jaundice, Damien was a healthy newborn. However, the pregnancy had been a difficult pregnancy, and several times I was told that I might lose the baby. As a first-time mother, I did not recognize the subtle differences between my baby and the babies of my friends. Damien rarely cried and was independent early on. The only time the babe seemed to fuss was when he was being held or when lotion was being applied to his skin. I quickly learned how to bundle Damien up like a burrito, nice and tight, so that he would be calm when it was time to feed him or rock him to sleep. The fact that he cried every time I held him was overshadowed by his early gross motor development. I was proud that my son was the first to hold his own bottle at 3 months, was able to sit up at 6 months, and was cruising furniture at 7.5 to 8 months. I had heard stories of babies skipping crawling, but had never met anyone that had a baby who had done so. Damien had some quirky behaviors, but I didn't find many of these completely odd. Damien had an unusual fascination with doors and tight spaces. He would open and close doors for hours at a time, and when I had difficulty finding him, I always knew that searching the linen closet or the cabinets on the bottom of the entertainment center would be where I could find him. He would be curled in a tight little ball surrounded by blankets and old quilts. I began leaving the bottom shelves of all cabinets empty and the floors of all closets clutter-free. Damien would climb up and down stairs continuously, spin in circles, tug at his clothes until I removed them, and rub his face in the carpet. But I was fine with all of that. The only thing that my son did that disturbed me was banging his head on the bars of his cribs, the wall, the concrete, and the floor. As Damien was too young to tell me why he was reacting the way he did, I started asking the doctor questions. He explained that some babies get frustrated, and because they cannot express their needs, they will bang their heads while throwing a fit. I tried to explain to him that Damien's behavior was not accompanied with a temper tantrum. For a matter of fact, the behavior was random and unexpected, but still the doctor insisted Damien was fine. When Damien was 10 months old, we moved 1,600 miles from the area he was accustomed to and from the people, my family. The decision was a hard one to make as I was pregnant with my second child, but my husband had been laid off from work and we had to go where the new job was. I enrolled Damien at toddler time at the local library. Surrounded by his peer group, I noticed a subtle difference in Damien's language development and the language development of the other babies. However, most of the children in the group were female, and I had read that females develop speech patterns long before males. I also felt that the move was partially to blame, because taking Damien from everything he had known must have been a traumatic experience for him. I felt this was why he had not begun to talk. I read a different book to Damien each night, and each night he would bring me Goodnight Moon, so I would read that one too. Although Damien didn't like to be held, he liked to be cuddled close to the body and wrapped tightly in my grandmother's quilt. Beads of sweat would form on his forehead and roll down his face, but without the quilt he refused to sleep. After many, many sleepless nights, I gave in, bundled the babe tightly, and rocked him to sleep. My husband and I began using this technique in order to soothe Damien when he was having one of his screaming fits. I call them screaming fits because this baby did not cry. No tears fell from his eyes as he would scream, and he would scream so long, so hard, and so loud that he would often lose his breath, and his lips would turn blue. At a year old, Damien was a pro at walking, running, feeding himself, and spinning without making himself sick or dizzy. And still, Damien was no different than any other baby to me. His brother, Dylan, was born on Damien's first birthday, and with the birth of Dylan, a lot of questions began to rise. Despite needing some stomach surgery, Dylan was a typical baby. He cried with tears often. He cried until I would hold him, and he smiled when he was held. But I wrote the differences off as differences in personality. I felt the stomach surgery Dylan required, along with the fact that Dylan was a breast baby, something I tried and failed at with Damien, contributed to his neediness. Dylan did not master any gross motor skills at an early age and had developed fine motor skills Damien had yet to develop. However, I still consider Damien the same as any other baby. That is, until Dylan began to talk. All of the questions that were quickly discounted by Damien's previous pediatrician began to float around in my head once again. Why won't my baby let me hold him? Why does he scream when I put clothes on him? Why does Damien like to be cleaned with an old rough washcloth rather than the new soft ones? Why does my baby bang his head on everything, often leaving large bruises and knots on his forehead? Why doesn't my son cry? Why doesn't he let me hold him? And so on. And now, of course, was the new question. Why doesn't Damien talk? Damien's new doctor addressed my concerns and pulled out an early child development screening questionnaire. With each question, a new question arose. Therefore, the doctor suggested testing through the local therapy center. Weeks of testing ensued, both in the therapy center and in the home. At 16 months of age, we were given the diagnosis of autism. Autism is a neurobiological disorder that affects communication and social interactions. Autism is a spectrum disorder, meaning each individual with autism is unlike any other person with autism. Autism ranges from low-functioning autism to high-functioning autism. Comorbid diagnoses can include, but are not limited to, seizure disorders, fine motor skill difficulties, gross motor skill difficulties, sensory difficulties, and anxiety and depression. I refused the diagnosis, for all I knew about autism was from the movie Rain Man, and my son was not going to be like that. Despite my denial, I enrolled Damien in speech therapy starting at 5 days per week, and I read the occasional article on autism. I checked out Baby Signs by Lyndon Acredillo and Susan Goodwin from the local library and started teaching Damien how to communicate by using sign language. I read to him constantly and made books of activities from construction paper and photographs of Damien and his brother in order to teach him the differences of words like in and out, up and down, and under and over. Everything we learned at therapy was practiced over and over again throughout the day. Not only did Damien enjoy the activities, but Dylan began to enjoy them as well. Damien's frustration level decreased, and so did the purple, blue, green, and red marks across his forehead. Although we were seeing progress, each developmental milestone reached was accompanied with new obstacles and frustrations. More and more frequently, the word autism was being used when seeking out therapies to ensure the development of my young son. However, it would take something drastic to change my mind, something that I would have never expected. Damien and Dylan loved watching the Scooby-Doo cartoons. Well, Dylan loved the cartoons and Damien loved the Over song. As I was shopping for groceries, I found the store carried Scooby-Doo Band-Aids. Knowing the boys' interest in the cartoon, I purchased the Band-Aids and took them home. Damien took the box, opened it, and dumped them out on the floor. I picked up the Band-Aids and told Damien no, as I returned them to the box, and as he went into one of his screaming fits. I told Damien, "You don't get a Band-Aid unless you have an ouch." By this time, the fits had become so regular that I had decided walking away might be more helpful than fretting over his behavior. Once Damien could no longer see me, the crying stopped as it always did. I was placing the box of Band-Aids in the medicine cabinet when I felt a tug on my shirt. I looked down at my beautiful baby boy and was horrified by what I saw. Damien grunted and pointed up to the box on the shelf as he repetitively made the sign for more. Tears fell from my cheeks as I removed the fork he had embedded in his arm from his hands. I cleaned the blood that ran down his chubby little fingertips and dressed Damien's wound. I did not want Damien to think his actions were okay, so I did not cover the wound with one of the new Band-Aids. I immediately called Damien's doctor and shared the horrifying experience. Another round of testing was ordered, and this was to be the first in a long line of scary situations Damien and I would face together. Not much time passed when Damien began to speak, and when he spoke it was in full sentences. Not the way Dylan learned to speak at all. As the months passed, frustration levels and behaviors worsened. Despite Damien's speech development, expressing his needs was still very difficult. Other than telling me more, he could not tell me what he wanted. He would tell me, "I want it," or "I want this," but he was not specific at all. If I didn't know what he wanted, I would give him choices and make him pick. Sometimes I got lucky, and one of the choices I gave was what he wanted. But other times I was not as lucky, and another screaming fit would ensue. At the time, I didn't understand why Damien always assumed we knew what he was talking about. Sometimes it seemed as if he was expecting us to read his mind. When Damien was 4, my husband and I decided to return to Texas because the only time the boy seemed healthy was when we visited my family. Also, we were concerned about the education system not addressing Damien's needs. They had refused him for the Head Start program. While packing, an episode of Montel Williams caught my attention. I had missed the lead-in of the discussion, but these parents were talking about their son. I popped a blank tape in the video cassette recorder and started recording the episode because it seemed everything they said about their son we had been through with ours. His actions, his behaviors, method of play, the fact that he loved to have cartoons on only in anticipation of reaching the Over-song, down to the boy's fascination with dinosaurs reminded me of Damien. This is when my denial ceased. This is when I realized Damien has autism. Before leaving for Texas, I retrieved Damien's report from the therapy center and made sure I had all of his medical records to take with me. Included with this information was a referral from his doctor and reports from the speech therapist. I called the school district where we would be living, provided them with information about Damien, and made arrangements for our arrival. My son was not to be denied services in our new hometown. I spent the next several years researching and reading about autism. I studied Greenspan, Mesabov, Atwood, and Grandin. I had to learn to become an effective advocate for my son, and I had to learn quickly. Because of my denial, we were already behind in ensuring proper physical and mental development. Our new path was a path that I thought I would never be able to travel, and a path I never would have expected. Upon our arrival, I pursued pediatricians, behavioral therapists, psychologists, psychiatrists. We were eventually referred to a neurologist for a near-invisible seizure disorder, petit mal epilepsy, to speech therapists to address communication needs, to an occupational therapist for fine motor skill difficulties and sensory integration, and to a physical therapist for gross motor skill difficulties attributed to toe walking. Together, Damien and I adventured down this path that I had not planned, and together we sought out new treatments and medications. If the treatments and medications failed to work, we sought out different treatments and medications. I feel like Damien had tried every new medication on the market and several of the older ones. Once we were able to get the behavioral issues under control, learning could begin. I never planned for my son to be on medications, and I certainly did not want to keep him on medications. However, I had come to realize that I must measure my decisions by determining Damien's own quality of life. I had to ask myself if he was able to achieve at expected levels, not of his peers, but of his abilities, with or without the medications. Therefore, I decided to use the medications along with 2 sessions per week with a behavioral therapist in order to teach Damien how to manage his behavior and learn appropriate social behaviors. As a family, we had to learn how to be not just a family member, but also an advocate for Damien. And we soon came to realize we needed to teach Damien how to advocate for himself. This started by teaching him how to appropriately ask for something he needs or requires. We had to teach him that people could not read his thoughts and he would have to voice his own thoughts and opinions. As you can imagine, this was tricky to teach. The results were often disastrous or hysterical depending on the situation. But as the people closest to him, we had to learn how to read Damien just as he had to learn to read us. Damien would often tell us that he feels like an alien from another planet. He does not think that he belongs here because I don't understand human emotions. Why can't you just say what you mean? You humans confuse me. Damien often refers to the rest of the people in the world as humans or you humans, depending on whom he's talking to. Over the years, we had seen Damien take great strides in his development, but the progress never seemed to catch him up to the level he needed to be both at home and academically. Around the end of Damien's 5th grade year, Damien began to notice differences between his classmates and him. Although his peers had noticed the differences a couple of years earlier, he was just starting to realize how different he actually was from his peer group. Depression began to settle in, and Damien started to withdraw into his own little world. A few of us humans were welcome in this world. At school, Damien had been moved from regular education inclusive classroom settings to special education contained settings. Damien was in the class with his peers only during lecture and was moved to content mastery for the remainder of the class periods. The bullying from the other students worsened. Damien was removed from this school when the bullying went too far, and he reacted very aggressively. Though the teachers were aware of the bullying towards Damien, they failed to notify his father or me of the incidents. They assumed that Damien would come home and tell us everything that happened the way typically developing children might. Because Damien had learned from me and his behavioral therapist that the best thing to do in aggressive situations is to walk away, he walked away. However, the bullying escalated into random beatings in the bathroom and pushing and shoving when Damien was attempting to use the restroom. Because Damien did not know how to react in this type of situation, he had started holding his bladder throughout the school day, and to this day, he will not go to a public restroom. In the classroom, Damien's grades suffered from a lack of participation in group work and writing assignments. Damien insisted on having the same classwork as everyone else because he felt it was unfair to his classmates for him to get shorter class assignments and less written work. Although writing is physically painful, Damien would spend a minimum of 2 and a maximum of 4 hours a day on homework. After 4 hours, I would take his work from him, lock it away until morning, and write a note letting the teacher know how long and how hard Damien had worked on his assignments. Because this is what Damien had asked for, the teachers disregarded his IEP, which explicitly stated that he was to get shorter assignments. As a result, his grades steadily dropped. His difficulties were not only evident in the classroom, but were evident in the gym as well. Damien has asthma and refused to tell his physical education teacher when he needed to go for his inhaler. Therefore, his failure to finish running led to extremely painful wall sits. Due to the excruciating pain from the combination of wall sits and the braces Damien wore on his feet, a trip to the orthopedist was warranted. Once the orthopedist provided Damien with a note explaining the damage the wall sits were doing to his legs and ankles, Damien refused to turn it in to the PE teacher, leading to more wall sits and more pain. I had to obtain a copy from Damien's file and hand the note to the teacher myself. All Damien ever said about it was, "I just want to be fair. I didn't do what the coach told me to do, so I have to do the punishment anyone else has to do." As the days passed, Damien began to slip away. The slip was quick, and the medications did not seem to help. Damien lost interest in everything but his cat. To him, the rest of the world did not exist. Damien's depression grew to the point that he attempted suicide. And finally, I knew I would have to try something different, something I had not thought to try before. I had been honest with Damien about autism from the time I accepted his diagnosis. I had never tried to candy-coat it or make it seem as if having autism was no big deal. However, I knew that when someone who is not Mom tells Damien something, he is more open to accepting it as truth. He is more willing to listen and try to understand what has been said. Likewise, if Damien reads something in a non-fiction book, then he has it right there set in stone. As black and white are the pages of the book, so too is his understanding, and Damien must learn what autism really means. I provided Damien with books such as Different Like Me, My Book of Autism Heroes by Jennifer Elder and Mark Thomas, and All Cats Have Asperger's Syndrome by Kathy Hoopman. Although Damien does not have Asperger's syndrome, he is high-functioning and very similar to individuals with Asperger's syndrome. I chose this book because of Damien's interest in cats and because the cats in the book define Damien. Together we read articles, and together we address any questions either of us have for one another. I rented movies about people with autism, such as Mozart and the Well and Snowcake, so Damien could see and understand the varying degrees of the disorder. Damien gradually began to learn that autism is nothing to be afraid of. He learned how it is okay to be different and how important accepting assistance and accommodations would be to ensuring him a future in our world. He also learned that it is okay to withdraw back into his own little world as warranted. And through his learning, Damien had taught me something important as well. I was discussing Damien's medications with his psychiatrist. As our session began to come to a close, Damien spoke up about his medications for the first time ever. "Mama, you always say it's okay to be different. Then why do you and the doctors have me on medication to make me like everyone else? I think it's okay to be different, so let me be different." As Damien rarely participated in any session, it was quite a surprise to both his psychiatrist and me that he did on this day. The psychiatrist asked Damien if he was sure that coming off the medications was what he really wanted, and Damien replied that we should trust him. Together, the three of us devised a tapering off plan that would have Damien off his medications within a 2-year time span. The psychiatrist and I addressed our concerns and explained to Damien that any aggressive or over-anxious behaviors would result in the use of medications if the behaviors could not be controlled. Damien agreed. Another surprise was just around the corner. The following year, I allowed Damien to sit in at his ARD so he could learn how to communicate his need for services in the school setting. We went through a checklist of difficulties he was having, and I told him what I would be asking for in the ARD. During the ARD, Damien sat patiently and attentively as all of the adults talked about his future and what we thought his goals and objectives should be for the new school year. As he would in the classroom, Damien raised his hand, longing for a chance to speak. He told us that some of the things we had set up do not help him, although these accommodations and modifications had been in place for years. He explained that the use of a pencil was faster than the use of an AlphaSmart, and forcing him to use one caused him to spend much more time than he needed to finish assignments. He suggested that we allow him to handwrite everything and maybe ask the teachers not to count off for his handwriting. Because this accommodation was in place for him before the use of the AlphaSmart, it was easy to add the accommodation to the IEP. Other accommodations he asked for were color-coding his classrooms and providing different colored folders for each, providing him with a checklist instead of having him write down his assignments, providing him with a weekly blank assignment sheet that he could take to the teachers to fill them out each day, having the teachers set up a rigid schedule for the class period and make out checklists which could be laminated and reused every day so he could remember to stay on task and turn in work, and access to the content mastery room if the assignment is difficult and more instruction is needed to teach the information. Damien standing up for himself and asking for what he needs has made a significant difference in his life and in the lives of his family, peers, and teachers. By the end of Damien's 6th grade year, he was passing all of his classes and all but one of those with very high marks. Therefore, it was determined that Damien would not need to be taught in a resource classroom for all but 2 of his classes, English and Math, in 7th grade. Damien has also become more socially and civically aware and responsible. He has stopped sitting in the quiet detention cubicles during meal times and has begun sitting with peers. Damien interacts in group activities more readily and active. Not only does he advocate for himself, but Damien also advocates on behalf of others, both with or without disabilities. Most importantly, Damien's depression has begun to subside. As Damien's 7th grade year began, Damien had been taken off of most of his medications. Without the anti-anxiety medication, Damien began to exhibit signs of anxiety which often brought on fits of depression. Therefore, Damien's educational coordinator and I had to come up with ways to teach him how to overcome the anxiety and adapt to stressful situations. Before I get to that, I will explain what his educational coordinator does. She is the one person in the school that I can contact who can make certain that any changes in Damien's home life and behaviors, along with medication issues and changes and concerns I may have, are addressed, and the teachers concerned are notified of the concerns and changes. Similarly, If any teachers have concerns or notice changes, they bring these to her attention so she can make me aware of these. Furthermore, she is the person in Damien's school that he knows he can trust and go to in order to address any concerns or difficulties that he may have. As I was saying, the educational coordinator and I had to find possible solutions to alleviate the anxiety from Damien's life. Damien was adamant about getting off the medications, and I felt the choice should be left up to him as long as he understood that once all other options had been exhausted, he would have to return to the use of medications. I had learned that the use of a beanbag could provide the soothing deep pressure Damien required. Once it was determined to be a suitable solution, I provided Damien with a beanbag at home. Furthermore, Miss Willis and I decided giving Damien time to unwind as needed when his anxiety level rose would be beneficial. We explained to Damien that if he feels uncomfortable or like he needs to pace or spin, to ask his teacher for a pass to content mastery. He would be allowed 15 to 30 minutes as needed to read a book, work on an assignment, or spin. We also made arrangements for Damien to be allowed extra time before and after gym to change his clothes, since his fine motor difficulties often made him late for classes. At home, I told Damien to let me know when he was stressed out, and I would allow him to go for a walk alone within the confines of our apartment complex. Because Damien learned he had to ask for permission, he had to learn to recognize when he was having difficulties and how to express his needs. Again, the techniques employed had made a significant difference in the life of this young man. By the end of his 7th grade year, Damien had a best friend, had good relationships with all of his teachers, and was no longer being bullied by his peers. At his springtime art, Damien asked that he be allowed to enter a regular English and math class. Although Damien passed math, he had not passed any of his math benchmarks and did not pass the math tax. Therefore, Damien had to make a compromise with the art team. He would be allowed to go into regular English class and promised to try his hardest in the next year's math class in hopes to move on to regular math in high school. Although the use of a class period for content mastery had been beneficial for Damien's progress, it was decided and agreed upon by the IEP team that Damien could take an elective instead of having the off period in 8th grade. Over the summer, Damien had acquired a volunteer job at the local zoo working in the reptile house. Before the job started, I practiced with him how to ask to have his needs met by offering solutions to any problem that may arise. I told Damien that it is okay to ask for checklists because many people without autism use them too. Damien told his boss that he would need to know his schedule for the day so he could write it down and check it off. More importantly, Damien had to learn how to switch from one activity to another and adapt quickly in emergency situations. He said, "This is how human life is. Things can't always go according to my schedule, and I have to learn how to deal with that." Unfortunately, problems arose from the loss of the content mastery period. Damien started his 8th grade year with difficulties in math. A few weeks after school started, Damien's math teacher and I called an emergency ARD to address this problem. We decided that Damien needed to have that period in order to help him keep up with the math class. Furthermore, we addressed the issues of Damien failing his computer class because his difficulties with fine motor skills lowered his typing speed, which in turn lowered his grade. The counselor felt that Damien should be removed from the computer class and content mastery should be put there. Again, Damien raised his hand and patiently awaited for his turn to speak. "I don't think you should take me out of computer class, and I don't want to leave it. This is the first time I have felt like I was part of a group, and I like being part of the class. I think you should take me out of PE, since the coach doesn't even have me suit out. All I do is sit there and keep score." After checking, we learned that 8th grade students do not have to take PE, and this solution was more suitable for Damien. For the computer class, we treated it as we did with the handwriting issue. Due to his fine motor skill difficulties, the teacher could not fail him for not performing at the speed levels of his peers. However, Damien did have to show a marked improvement in speed and had to know where the keys are on the computer without looking by the end of the course. This proved to be a suitable solution for Damien as well. By the end of 8th grade, I had teachers emailing me, telling me what a pleasure it has been to have Damien in their classroom. His English teacher told me that he was the center of the classroom, and on days he was absent, the classroom did not seem to have the same jubilant jive to it as the days that he was present. This was Damien's first year in a regular English class, and he received an A in the class. He received an academic award for achievement in math as well. This year, Damien did have difficulty passing the math tax, but after the second time, he did pass. He received a commended performance in reading, writing, science, and social studies. This year, Damien told the other members of his art committee, "I am taking regular algebra next year. I am not going into a resource class because I know that algebra will help me get into college, and I want to be a psychologist when I grow up. So I have to go to college to do that." Regardless of his performance on the tax, Damien's grades speak for themselves. 8th grade is the only year since elementary school that his math average ranged in the high 80s to low 90s. This year, Damien chose to walk me down the aisle as my escort during my college graduation. He stood before an auditorium full of people and did not flinch, pace, or spin. He told me if I want to live in the human world, I have to learn to do things that other humans do, and getting up in front of people is one of those things. Damien received an A for the year in his speech class, and the teacher stated that he was one of the best debaters in the class because he knows how to speak his mind. Damien has been rehired for the summer at the zoo and will be working with the same zookeeper as he did last year. Because the position Damien asked for was directly related to his key interest area, Damien finds the job interesting and exciting, and this interest makes him a valuable member of the team. As Damien has stated, "I love animals because I understand them better than humans, and animals understand me too." Damien's future goals are many, but he wants to focus on helping others with autism learn how to adapt to their surroundings. He plans to teach others with disabilities and who have been traumatized how to live in the world that the rest of us live in. He is currently writing a fiction novel in which the protagonist explores difficult issues and situations Damien has had to make sense of. From birth to today, Damien and I have walked a long, treacherous path, and we have accomplished much. Damien has gone from being considered a child with low-functioning autism to a young man with high-functioning autism. Damien has reached far beyond what has been previously expected, and he has fulfilled some of his dreams. Damien has learned to adapt in a manner that his disability is invisible and unnoticeable to most people he knows. Damien has been medication-free for over a year and has learned how to control his anxiety and aggression. Damien loves to smile because there is something nice about having your face stretched out. He enjoys listening to people and learning about the world around him. Although he would rather be abducted by aliens than humans, Damien finds human emotions as fascinating as the bodies that house them. Most importantly, Damien knows he is not like any other person, and he knows when to ask for assistance when accommodations are appropriate. These skills he has learned throughout his life are skills that will open up a different future than the one he faced 14 years ago.